Odyssey of the West, Part 6, Lecture 12, Jean-Paul Sartre. And now, Professor Joel F. Richeimer.
Existentialism was, of course, a movement in philosophy, arts, and theater that blossomed after the Second World War, and it had its philosophical roots in the writings of Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, and had its spiritual roots in the two wars that devastated Europe and the post-war fear of a nuclear war and the almost complete collapse of religious authority in Europe. The existentialist movement had many major figures that include philosophers, novelists, and playwrights, just as Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, Martin Heidegger, Karl Jaspers, Eugene Ionesco, Samuel Beckett, Martin Buber, Paul Tillich, among others. But Jean-Paul Sartre probably best epitomized the movement. He was himself a philosopher, a novelist, a playwright, and a political activist. He was extremely controversial. He was loved and he was hated. When he died, he had one of the biggest funerals in the history of France. But he was also put on the index by the Roman Catholic Church. He was given the Nobel Prize, but he rejected it. His apartment was bombed twice. When he was arrested for participating in a political demonstration, he was released by the President of France, Charles de Gaulle, who said that France could not arrest a Voltaire. Part of the controversy surrounding him is his interpretation of existentialism, which led to a particular form of radical left politics that deeply influenced the politics of the 60s and the counterculture. He changed the focus of the political left, and traditionally the left was focused on issues like class issues, like who owns factories, wages, bread and butter issues, economic issues, and so on. He changed the focus of the political left from those kind of issues, those economic issues, to consciousness-raising issues. Issues like how you understand yourself, feminism, and the sexual revolution. Though his most influential writings were in the late 40s and the early 50s, they had a marked influence on the cultural and sexual revolutions of the 60s. He had, for instance, an open relationship with his lifelong partner, Simone de Beauvoir. They never married. This is fairly unheard of in the early 50s. Simone de Beauvoir herself is an important philosopher, and she wrote the feminist existentialist classic, The Second Sex, which is a defining moment in feminist theory because it was a transformation from focusing on class and economic issues to issues of consciousness raising. The core idea of the Sartrean vision is that you are radically free. That does not mean you could do anything. It doesn't mean you could flap your arms and fly, or you could walk through walls. No, it means there are things, of course, can happen to you and that you can't control. And your body is like any other object in the world. If you fall out of a window, your fall follows the laws of physics. But radical freedom does mean, among other things, that you can control the meanings of the events of your life. So two people can experience the same type of event, a car accident, a promotion, whatever, and each is free to interpret it any way he wishes. Nothing constrains your interpretation. You're completely responsible for your beliefs. Nothing can compel you to believe one thing or the other. Let's say the sky suddenly opens up. There's lightning, there's thunder, and out steps someone claiming to be Jesus. Miracles suddenly happen. The lion lies down with the lamb. There's world peace. According to Sartre, you, and the emphasis on the word you will still have to decide whether it is really Jesus or not. Or maybe a trickster, or an impostor, or hallucination, or the Antichrist. Nothing forces you to decide one way or the other. It is always your choice. You could accept the miracles or reject them as miracles. It is your choice. And his Sartre's second point is closely related. You can't help but making a choice. There's no such thing as a non-choice. Everything you do in life, in fact, is a choice. There's no non-choices. In fact, you would say, you're creating your life by your series of choices. Sartre has a famous way of putting this. He says, you are condemned to be free. You are completely responsible for the meanings of the events of your life. It's your decision whether something is good, bad, or indifferent. For instance, historically, philosophers and religious thinkers have spent a lot of time trying to prove that they are objective moral values. Sartre is saying, it makes no difference. Let's say some philosopher or religious thinker has a proof, and that they claim shows their objective moral values. Sartre would say, so what? It is still up to you to decide to accept or reject that proof. You are fully responsible for what you think and what you believe. Sartre does not think this freedom is necessarily good. How could he? You decide whether freedom is good or not. Freedom, in fact, for Sartre, is a source of anxiety. Most of us don't want this freedom. So we pretend that we are not free. If you're free, as Sartre claims, then obviously, you're free to believe you're not free. You're free to reject your freedom. That's just a consequence of being free. For most of us, according to Sartre, we do just that. You can act as if the alarm clock in the morning forces you to go to work. It's time to get up. I have to be at work. I can't be late. But Sartre claims the alarm clock has no power. And you don't want to think that you give the alarm clock its power. As Sartre writes, here's a quote. This is from the book Being in Nothingness, his classic work. The alarm clock which rings in the morning refers to the possibility of my going to work, which is my possibility. But to apprehend the summons of the alarm clock as a summons, that is to say, to give the alarm clock its meaning as a summons, is to get up. Therefore, the very act of getting up is reassuring, for it eludes the question, is work my possibility? By getting up, Sartre's saying, you give the alarm clock the meaning, it is time to get up. The alarm clock itself has no meaning. You gave it that meaning. The ringing of the alarm clock is just a noise. It's just sound waves. But by getting up, not only do you give it meaning, the alarm clock, now you don't have to think that you're the one who's giving it that meaning. Sartre tells the story of walking alongside a cliff. Of course, you are a physical object. You could fall. A rock could fall on you. The path can crumble. So you feel fear. But something else can happen on the cliff. You could stand at the edge of the cliff and feel anxiety. Anxiety is not the fear of falling. Anxiety is the fear of jumping. It's the realization, according to Sartre, that nothing but you can stop yourself from jumping. It's up to you. You're standing at the edge of the cliff, and suddenly you don't trust yourself. And this is important for Sartre, because he thinks this is an experience we do have. You don't trust yourself, so you step backwards. The common tendency, the common desire, is to transform that anxiety, which is the realization that you're free, and it's a frightful realization for Sartre, into a fear, the realization that you're an object. You step back, you hold on to the hand railing, you convert your anxiety into fear. You don't want to experience your freedom. Freedom is painful for Sartre. The same thing happens for everyone who's on a diet. You can make all the resolutions that you want. That you won't, for instance, eat the dessert. Your doctor can give you medical advice. Your friends can make comments to you. None of it matters. When you're staring in front of the slice of cheesecake, you have to decide, once again, whether to eat the cheesecake or not. All the resolutions in the world, all the medical advice, all these are powerless. You are alone with yourself, and you have to decide. According to Sartre, you do not like being free. Freedom means that you're responsible for your decisions, so you act as if you're not free. Consider the following things. Consider, for instance, divorce chains or suicide chains. Now, here's an interesting fact. Divorces are in fact contagious. They spread through a community. That's a fact. One person gets a divorce, then somebody knows about them get a divorce, and then the person knows about that person gets a divorce, and a chain is formed. The same is true with suicides. But how is this possible? There's no such thing as a divorce virus. There's no divorce germ. So what explains a divorce chain? It happens because when somebody has a divorce, it makes other people realize they can have a divorce too. They realize that they have a possibility that they never really considered before. And these events can cause anxiety. People don't realize their options. They don't realize they have more options than they thought. In fact, according to Sartre, they have more options than they want. This perhaps is at bottom what is meant by consciousness raising. Sartre transformed some of the political left into a consciousness raising movement. So he moved the political left from the traditional concerns of inequality and wages and ownership of factories and economic issues to a consciousness-raising movement. Consciousness-raising is realizing that you're more free than you thought. You have more options than you realize. And that what seems natural or inevitable or the way things have to be is really a product of many choices. We want to think that we are objects. And of course, we are in part objects. If I fall, I can get hurt. But Sartre wants to say, people are not just objects. A table is just a table. It has objective properties, a certain height, a certain weight, a certain color, what have you. But people are more than objects.